Right. So this morning we are looking at a Welsh landscape. We're looking at a beautiful waterfall coming from the Glyders in North Wales. We're going to be working with some palette knives, but we'll start sketching with a brush. So I have synthetic round brush, medium size. What we'll do then, we'll work with the brush for some of the backgrounds, the sky and some of the background mountains. We'll work with the brush on some of the areas on the rocks, and then we'll bring the palette knife, okay? So the whole work doesn't have to be done in the palette knife if you don't want to. If you'd rather not work in the palette knife at all, that's fine as well. Just work with the larger, kind of maybe flatter brushes. If you want to work mainly with the palette knife, that's absolutely fine as well. But maybe give yourself an idea with the sketch using the brush. So we're not going to be using as much oil mixtures today, only probably for sketching mainly. And then we'll have, I have a very flat palette, so I can mix all my colors very easily with the palette knife on a flat surface. Right, let's start with the composition. So I'm gonna go for a little bit of tips, a little bit of white, and I'm gonna go for some Payne's gray. So Payne's grays are bluey black. So you might end up with kind of gray colors, or you might end up with some blacky type of colors. If you want to add a hint of brown to it, or sometimes a hint of violet, that's fine as well. Right, so let's decide how much of the sky and the dark blue mountains we're going to have at the back. So I'm looking at a nice V shape at the top of the painting first. And I think I'm going to elongate mine and give it a little bit of extra space because I've got slightly longer format on my board here. So I think I can quite happily extend and give a bit more sky to my mountains. However, I do like the idea of having a very sharp, steep curve. Right, if I'll just do a tiny bit more lighter here, you can see it better then. I quite like having it nice and steep here. Maybe put that curve a little bit higher there as well. Okay, that might be my exaggeration for my build-up of composition. I think maybe something like this. Because I have got slightly elongated format, I just really like the idea of looking at everything here as it is more or less on a photograph, and maybe just having a little bit of extra space for the mountains and the sky and the fog. Right, so the mountains at the back, all I'm going to do, I'm just going to see where the tops are. Kind of, it's all hidden there, so it doesn't really have to be even drawn, the tops there. With a bit more of a sharp edge for it here. Okay, for this right-hand side mountain. No, there is going to be in the fog. Right, next part, there are loads and loads of elements on the rocks areas. So instead of getting lost with a huge amount of it all, let's just identify some of the major key points. So I have some big rocks. So these are very big chunk of the rocks here. Okay, I've got a diagonal for the waterfall. So I'm going to break it down into steps and maybe focus on a couple of rocks, maybe somewhere close to the kind of the diagonal going up towards the mountains, the blue mountains at the top. So what I'll do here, I'll break this big chunk. So it's, if I divide my paper into half, my canvas, my board, it's a little lower. It's on the lower part of that half, maybe even somewhere here. So all of it coming together, maybe as a big chunk. Okay, there's different lights, there are different darknesses, but as a form, as a big shape, all of this one looks all together. You can decide how the waterfall might be coming around. Might give it a little bit more space deliberately, so it doesn't land too heavily in the edge of the paper here. So there's a nice thickness to it. Yeah, it's almost as we can see what's underneath of it. So if I've broken it completely down into simplified form here. Okay. And another one I could sketch more with my Payne's Grey Solid, because I've got loads of shadows here, so maybe I should sketch with black. And let's find that curvature, that angle of the waterfall, how it's going to come in here. Again, I'm just allows me to look at the big rocks at the foreground here. So this is how I'm going to do this. And then I'll subdivide them tiny bit more. So let's say that rock stays as it is, but might just change its shape at the top a little. Okay, and the slant there. Another one comes somewhere from the back, but they've got a big break in the center, and that's where that angle changes as well. Okay, so that might be something here. We're probably going to see some other ridges in there, but again, we can do that quite spontaneously, quite quickly later on. Those are big shapes. This one will have a bit more of a narrower shape, but there are loads of other small rocks, and it doesn't matter really what they are. There's something's going on there. And all the rest is going to be just broken down into slightly different diagonals when we work with the color. It doesn't have to be drawn at this stage at all. Okay. And my next stage will be to follow my diagonal of the waterfall. So that's going to stay somewhere here. And what I'm going to try to do, I'm going to try to work and break kind of the steps, how the little steps might be creating the form the waterfall is going to start following. So if I'll use some of the straight lines to identify some of the shapes of the rocks. Now I can't quite see exactly where the waterfall come in from here, but I will see some trickles of water here and there. So all I'll do for now, I'll identify some of those rocks where the trickles might be going. Maybe direction of the rocks. Yeah, I'm not going to paint them all. At some point, I might look for certain, for some of them, to help me out, maybe just to look up for the color, or maybe to look up for maybe dynamics of it. Okay, I'm definitely not going to be able to paint them all. I think I'll run out of my patience. I'll have to follow kind of the formula and the feel for it, rather than copying it meticulously. Okay, but I quite like some of the angles here of some of the other rocks. This one is a nice big one, so that's nice, a character one. Again, what I'm looking for a line which is going, creating another V shape. I'm trying to look what's going to be higher, what's going to be lower. I'm looking for the kind of the patterns, similar patterns or different patterns, so the shapes are not repeating. Okay, and let's go for a little bit of, just to see where the waterfall might be. I'll do a tiny bit more paler. I wouldn't do it white yet, but let's just find where it might be coming through. Maybe somewhere here, maybe somewhere here. If we lost it, we can always look out for the shapes before we come back to the actual waterfall. Okay, maybe something there. Again, we're interested for that pattern. Is that's going to look quite interesting Okay, I like that one a lot. This means that this one's gonna have to go, okay, somewhere that direction. Okay. And my waterfall itself might just have a shape, a rough shape. And what's going to happen here when it falls all the way. And what I might do, I might bring it so it comes out somewhere here. And I might bring it out. So we have got some rocks here and there is some water here, but it's quite transparent, quite, I can't see them, the foamy parts of the waterfall there. So what I might do, I might just have a suggestion. So it's again, then everything's going there, and not just coming out from the page here, but it still brings it a little bit more focus, a little bit more bringing everything across. Okay. I'll play with these lines afterwards. Okay, let's get me some black back on my brush. Okay, so that's might be my darker shape here. Just don't want to lose myself within those shapes. Okay, that's a big rock. That's a smaller rock. That's some divisions going on there. Okay, that's fine. If you're not too sure, stick to as simple shapes as possible. You'll find your way around afterwards. Right, this is a lot of empty area, which is good. We will work with it as a simplified shape. So we'll have something tiny bit more darker at the top. And then we just have some steps going around the waterfall. All the rest will be quite a flat area. Not much differentiation of tone, but there will be varieties of colors in there. Okay, might just put a tiny bit of water here. Again, I'm not going to work out too much details in there at all. Okay, I don't like this shape, it just looks a bit silly. Okay, that will be plenty, I think. And on the other side, I think I'll just identify a couple of darker shadows as big tones, as big shapes. Again, next to the waterfall here, that will be a nice dark element. And another one coming up next to it. So we can have a bit of water here as well. So that's a nice pattern of darkness here. And all of that dark pattern as well. So I'm in a way, I'm building up a tonal image. Yeah. And that will help me to navigate between that huge amount of uneven organic shapes, because I'm looking for those patterns of light and dark. Okay, that's will be my darker tones. All of this is going to be dark anyway. Okay. Now the sky looks very light, but in comparison to the waterfall itself, it's much darker. And if our waterfall again got loads of fresh whites, if we'll make the sky slightly duller, slightly darker. It will look like a very stormy type of cloud over the Blue Mountains. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to start with the mountains themselves, the Blue Mountains there, and then I'll add some gray bluey color for the sky. So I'll have my cobalt blue with a small amount of Payne's gray. Let's just make it quite a grayish blue mountain. Okay, that's quite a lot of Payne's gray. Let's just mix it a little bit better here. Payne's gray and cobalt blue. Okay, now at the moment, because my background is quite dark violet color, I might not see the exact tone I need to get. So I need to be careful. Maybe while I'm putting some of this paler color, maybe I should put some lighter cloud color just to give me an idea the contrast. So let's just put a little bit of paler color here. Okay, that looks quite still dark. Okay, maybe this is going to be the top, and the right hand side of the cloud probably going to be the lightest one. And the reason I'm doing it with a brush, although we're planning to do most of the work with a palette knife, is because it's a background which shouldn't be taking too much attention from the front, from the waterfall and the rocks. So if I'll have softer lines there, that will be much more beneficial for me later on. Let's make this area a tiny bit more grayish, a little bit more duller. Trying to look at the dynamics of my strokes here as well. Okay. Tiny bit more sharp edge here, so I'll keep those strokes that way. Tiny bit more still light. I think the paint is taking all the light away from my brush. So I keep reintroducing some fresher white here. Okay, maybe a tiny bit still more dynamics by bringing a small amount of light. So we'll have a glowing feel for it. The light is coming through the mountain there. Okay, now I think I'm ready to bring back the cobalt blue and Payne's gray. Some places I might have some fresher cobalt blue, maybe even a bit of emerald, sorry, not emerald, ultramarine and Payne's gray. To see those mountains much more blue. Okay. Slightly maybe paler here. Okay, that looks quite pale, maybe not as pale as that. Again, try not to work into too much texture yet. I don't want it to take too much attention. A bit more stronger. Cobalt blue. And if Payne grays is somewhere present there, That's good. If not, that's looking quite good as well.
Julia, it's Gaynor. Sorry to bother you. I'm having trouble with this concept of the medium. Now,
Okay.
are you painting with any medium on your brush to make it flow? Or are you just painting with?
I'm painting with the oil mixture.
Yeah. Yes, the mixture.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter today because we're going to be using a lot of palette knife techniques. So it doesn't matter if you just be using tubes today. But for this,
No.
because it's nice and soft, and
Yeah.
that's why it's so soft, because I'm using the oil mixture.
Yeah, that's what I've got, and that's what. But because if you don't do that, it doesn't flow very well, does it?
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Okay,
Okay.
you're welcome. No, it just gives it a nice flow. Yeah. If I don't want to have a good flow, I'll use or more paint, or I'll use tubes. Yes, that's right. So that will be. Actually, I did like it darker here. Okay. So mountains are there, ready. Okay, just taking them all the way down here. Okay, that might give me extra ridges here. I'm not introducing any other colors. If I wanted to see any other violets in there, I can smudge some of the surface if I wanted to see a bit of warmth underneath here. And then I might just lift some of it. But I don't have to. I'm quite happy just seeing paler blues, darker blues across. That's quite good. Okay, and what I'm doing, I'm smudging them a little bit more into my foreground here. Quite like this one. So when I start bringing my stronger colors, my oranges of the background, that will be all ready for me as well. Right. This brush could be washed, moved aside, and we can start working into some of the paler colors. The next range of colors I'll need are going to be ochre, going to be any of your browns. I'm going to use Van Dyke brown, violet, and also maybe crimson, so pinky type of red. You've got all your blues in the palette anyway. I need to make a nice sharp edge for the border next to my mountains, my blue mountains. So what I think I'm going to do first, I'm going to mix some of the color with my brush, identify part of the border, and then go with a palette knife and work with a palette knife. Okay. So I'm going to go for some white, fresh white, quite a lot of ochre. So that will be a super bold color for that. I don't want it to be very bold, so I'm going to go and a tiny bit more Van Dyke, and I think some crimson. So that will be much more happier type of color I'll need. And I can vary those 3-4 colors together, the proportion of them. So the Van Dyke is there, so my ochre and crimson just not gonna look too orangey and red. Yeah, Van Dyke is just cooling it off a little bit more into the brown side of things. I can have something tiny bit more darker, something tiny bit more lighter within that range. So let's remove those 2 samples against this area. So now I'm not going to be using any oil or tubes mixture. Well, for the brush I might just tiny bit, but for the palette knife I'm not going to use anything. So if I need to remove it, it hasn't got extra oily surface. Yeah, it will be just so if I need to swap paints, remove it, change it, I can easily do it. Right, I can see some really nice strong light. Just a bit more on the border. It's not as red as it appears. So let's have a tiny bit more ochre here. Okay, there's a lovely, nice, very narrow ridges. So that's, I think, what I'm interested into here. Nice borders. Okay. I'm not worried about exaggerating the warmth of that grass, of those little edges there, because that's going to be my boldest, strongest color. Okay, something there. And another side, maybe a little warmer rather than going into the white, more into the warmth. Okay, something again here. And that tells me that this one is too strong white, so I'm just going to lift it off with my palette knife. It's too much. The color is a little bit too strong, too white, too not saturated enough with warmth. I think initial, that's better, exciting color. Okay. And again, I just want to have a softer edge next to the sky and the mountain. So I'll go with a brush for this area as well. Okay, so I've got that one. Something uneven here on the surface of my canvas, but it's okay. Okay. Right, and now I can start mixing my colors a little bit more with my palette knife. So I'll go for the same range of colors. White, ochre, a little bit of crimson, Van Dyke, or a hint of violet, whichever. Both colors will be fine. And let's just hit this area a little bit stronger. No, that's way too, again, I think it's too light. In comparison, working with a palette knife in comparison to acrylics, with oils, we can keep working as long as we want. We can mix colors bordering each other. We can remove colors bordering each other. That's a nicer color. They're not going to dry quickly. Okay, that might be some of this area. Okay. Now, I don't quite like that flat surface either. I liked how I had that light there before. And again, this is very much of a key point for me of light and warmth. So if I'm not happy with it, I'm not going to carry on. I'm going to start again. Okay. Let's have some fresh color again. More ochre, crimson, some white. I think I have enough of browns here anyway. Okay, let's bring that, maybe not as red, more ochre here. Okay, maybe some more. if in comparison to me, you already have done that area, you can have a look where else you can see similar color. If not, keep going and mixing the colors you want, and don't let anything stop you, prevent you from getting the colors you need. Don't move further till you're happy with what you're doing. With a choice of colors, with a choice of contrast. I think that's what it was. I think the contrast weren't strong enough for me. They were just too bland. Okay, so that's might be my softer contrast, and maybe some sharper contrast will come up. So maybe more here, which I think I can do better with a brush and leave maybe my palette knife for the rocks further down here. Okay, I think I'm getting happier with this. Definitely much happier. A little bit of extra light in this area. I think that's again just gives me that diagonal, a little bit more of lost found edge for the mountain there. I think the scale is quite small, the scale of the painting, so I think if I'll get into my details with the palette knife too quickly, I'll lose the perspective. So maybe on the foreground I'll work for a bit longer with my palette, with my brush, just to get some of the contrasts going. Okay, so my back mountain here, just smudge it a little so I can put some darker shapes over this area as well. Okay. So it's very easy to add bold lights and bold shadows. So it's a combination where we want to have the in-between lights, like these two now, are exactly doing what I wanted them to do. Brilliant. And maybe something similar I need to do here. Tiny bit of light. Or it could have been a tiny bit more contrast. Okay, I think that might be even an extra. Smudge. Okay, let me just clean my finger here. Otherwise I'm contaminating some of the colors. Okay. Okay. And another highlight back. And I think I've done with that lovely light area at the top, and I can start working on my rocks. So I'm just bringing this highlight back, a little bit back to where it was. Need to be much more cooler, sorry, darker highlight. Okay, and then I can do those ridges of shadows. Tiny bit more darkness still here. Okay. Nice contrasts. And that supports this darker contrast as well. Okay. Again, I'm constantly looking for repetitive lines or repetitive shapes. My eye doesn't stop thinking about them. And if I spot something, I can't rest till it's gone. Okay, I think that's looking better now. Nice ridges coming up. My next plan will be looking at the lighter parts of the rocks, but I'm going to give you a moment to catch up here as well. Right, as I said, next step will be looking at all the highlights on the rocks. Again, I want to work with a brush first and then work with the palette knife on top of it. So I'll use not an oil mixture probably for this one. I'm going to use some turbs so the surface doesn't stay too oily. I'm going to have some similar colors to what I just had now, but I'm going to add more white to it, so it will start looking much more paler. So we've got some warmth into it, or I can also just add a hint of any of those kind of paler blues, Payne's grey, just to have a little bit of warmth in it, but not just ochre, pure ochre. It's got that grayish kind of surface. Okay, that gives me an idea where this is going to be. Okay, big chunk of it. I find it's easy to be done with a brush. Okay, all of that one is there. And so that's my main big chunk. Then I have some of the smaller ones here. Okay, they're just following like as the light goes. And there is one on the top somewhere here, a bit more narrower. Again, I'm looking for overall light and darkness. There's something going up. Another rock this side. Again, I'm identifying those shapes. Okay. And maybe a nice edge somewhere here. Yeah, this one's already I've highlighted quite nicely. Okay. Any other ones? Yes, I think there's another one's coming up somewhere here. Again, just separates what's going to stay dark, what's going to stay light. And that might be just turning gently. It's almost like a silhouette of some sort. I think think those are my main lights done. Right, and now I'm ready to get going with some medium tones with my palette knife. So I have a palette knife now without any folds. Okay, so Julia and found something else on it. Okay, so the palette knife needs to be really, if it's got a damaged end or surface somewhere in the middle, it might give you problems with working with it. So I'm going to go for a medium-sized palette knife, and I'm going to start looking for some of them medium tones. Some beautiful violets, which we already have, could be partially preserved. I'm going to start with just enough color between the highlights and between the kind of the violet ones. So there will be still white, ochre, violet. So that's how we mixed our background. But the proportion of white and ochre is going to be dominating. Now we're mixing the color with a palette knife. We need to be extra careful mixing it really, really well, taking our time. So I'm mixing it evenly as long as it needs to be. So I don't want to have marbling effects. I keep pressing on the palette knife to get all the paints off its bottom, so if it has uneven tones, that might influence the color we'll be working with. So let me test it here. Still a little bit light than I wanted. Then I'll add a small amount of violet to it, or maybe a bit of Van Dyke. Again, just test it. Okay, that's looking better, I think. I'll just put it as an area here. And now my rocks will start taking shape by the texture I'll be applying with the palette knife. So let's place a few shapes here. I'm going to try to vary the widths of them if I can. Try to vary the patterns they'll be creating, because it's I'm using the same thickness, the same size palette knife, so I don't want to fall into the trap of having similar marks throughout the picture. Just mixing a tiny bit more darker color just to have a slight variety. Maybe this is going to be done for my key areas. Right, this is too marbly for me, so let's just make it a tiny bit more even mixed. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to have all of my painting done with a palette knife today. I'm seeing some of the difficulties I might be having if I were to do so, because there are loads of really nice small contrasts, which I think I'll struggle doing with a palette knife. Okay, so these different textures on the rocks might give me slightly different patterns here. That's quite good. Some of the darknesses. And because I have a dark violet background, if I miss certain sections out, let's say if I'll have gaps between my paints, applied with a brush or the palette knife, especially the palette knife. The background will support that without a problem because it's already within the scheme of colors we want. Okay, that's quite good as well. So I have a tiny bit of extra violet and brown now. I'm just going to look for where else this color might be going. Okay, I can just support myself with a brush so it doesn't go where I don't want it to go. So I'm breaking out, I'll have some sharp edges now, but might not have a quick build-up of the right amount of tone, or maybe the volume might not be building up quickly enough to support certain areas, but the textures is started to happen now. The texture, if you like something at specific stage, try to resist not overpaint it. I don't think I'm going to go into palette knife further into the small details. I think I'll struggle with that. However, I'm just going to bring a little bit more crimson on my palette knife here. I think that's a bit good. A hint of crimson here. So I'll be just using the same colors, the ochre, the white, the violet, the Van Dyke and crimson. I'm just going to slightly vary the amount of it. I'm going to slightly vary the volume I'll be putting. So I quite like this redness now within this color. So let's just follow it in a couple of situations. For example, just on the right hand side of the waterfall. Maybe it's the redness of the heather, maybe it's a particular stone, maybe it's something, I think it might be part of the slate kind of formation of the chemicals in it. Also, when the stone is wet, it has slightly different color properties to it, which is very, very interesting. If you remember walking in these type of areas in the Lake District in Wales and Scotland, when you're in this kind of ruggedy mountain terrain, and if you're walking past the areas where it's wet, you will see the colors on the stone very different in comparison to the stones which are exactly the same but dry. So that's, I find it very fascinating how the same boring color under the influence of water could have such a marvelous color changes. Okay, so I'm bringing some of that red across here. I think I'm happy to start introducing a hint of cooler colors now at the bottom here. To see them, I'll still need a small amount of white, and let's have a small amount of blue within this color. Okay, there are a couple of lighter rocks. Okay, they might be looking too pinky, too pale. Okay, but maybe because of it, I can use this color somewhere here. That might be a good option, and creating some of the textures on this rock will be quite good as well. So it's within the light color. I can try to create textures. Okay, too much. Let's bring some of that paler color back. Maybe smudge it a little bit more into the surface. Sometimes with a palette knife, it's easy to work on a larger scale because you have bigger boundaries for each shape, and you can create that and work with that texture. So I quite like the texture in the center here, but I'm not overly convinced about the edges of this rock. So what I'll do, I'll probably support myself with a brush here as well. All right, let me just maybe do the border here a little bit more. Okay, that's better. I think because I'm smudging into the sharper edges of this lighter rock, I think that gives it much more pleasant feel. That's good. Okay, that's a good mark. Oh, that's a brilliant mark. All right, can I do anything else here similar? And some of those lighter big shapes. Okay. Right, the next stage is to develop some of the darker tones within the medium tone. So not as dark as blacks, but something in between. I think mainly at the foreground here, maybe a tiny bit more into this side of the waterfall as well. So again, similar range of colors, which I have just run out. So some white, some ochre, some violet, putting it all together, maybe less crimson this time. So I haven't put any crimson, but I will like to add a small amount of or cobalt blue or ultramarine, and move that browny color into slightly cooler version. Right, I'm ending up with a very pale color, so it means that I need more violet and maybe even Payne's gray, stronger darkness. Okay, let's test it out on top here. That's a nice color. I'm picking up a little bit of extra lighter colors from you, probably from the back of my palette knife. So I'm just going to mix it a tiny bit more. Okay, that's a nice stroke. So the strokes I'm painting with are quite thick. So if I don't want to kind of lose the color, if you know the new color I'm introducing, so the previous color, let's say at the back of the surface, is not going to stand at the front. I just need to make sure that I'm introducing a thicker color. Okay, so that's an area is looking. So if I press too much on my palette knife and I start lifting the color, which was there initially, maybe, yeah, taking maybe too much space there, it will come through. So I need to be more gentle with the pressure of the palette knife. So let's develop some of these blocks of exciting color here. Again, if I need something extra dark, okay, something still paler here before I'll go into the blacks. Tiny bit more blue, tiny bit more Payne's gray. Again, gently moving on towards the extra darker tones. I'm interested in making this shape quite nice. Let's come out very dark on the screen especially, but it's just right in its consistency here. Again, give me some really nice ridges now. Not a little bit of extra darkness. If you find it's hard to control the amount of paint or where you're placing it, help yourself with a brush. Okay, I'm going just over the waterfall, but it doesn't matter because I know where my waterfall is going to be, but it might be easier for me to apply the actual color here. Okay. Can remove the extra paint from the waterfall area. And just reintroduce the shape of it. So now this is going to be somewhere here. Okay, I'm not touching the waterfall itself, not touching any whites itself yet. Right, let's do a couple of darker tones, maybe somewhere here. Again, they're not black. They might just appear a little bit more dark on the screen, but they're just darker versions of some of those grays and browns. Okay, there's another broken ridge there. Maybe a nice paler tone. Maybe that's not going to be too dark, but some texture will be quite good as well. So what I have on my palette, I have a darker version, a lighter version, and I'm in between. I'm mixing the colors or going one way or the other way. So it allows me to vary the tones as well. So this area is needs some attention. Just have a tiny bit more work here. Maybe differentiating some of the larger shapes a bit more. Maybe finding tiny bit more details on the very big shapes, which are too simple. And again, keep mixing the colors, making sure that you're not just stretching that small tiny bit of paint you have left on the palette, but constantly working with volume of paint. Don't save paint. Give yourself that pleasure of working with it. Okay, this is a nice dark area as well. Once you start introducing very dark tones, be extra careful not to contaminate everything else with that color. It's harder to go around with lighter colors next to it. Everything will start turning to very black. So tend not to get the very dark tones introducing too early. Okay, there's loads of unclear surfaces here, so I'm just going to try to keep them simple. If you feel you need any more other texture around waterfalls themselves without painting the water, where some of the smudges needs to be, some of the texture might need to be done, again, that might be a perfect time, because we're coming close now to start working into a bit more finer details on those rocks and start painting the waterfalls shortly. So any other texture, so maybe you don't need to introduce the color, but just work into a tiny bit of texture. That might be an opportunity for us. Okay, I'm still keeping this big white rock, light rock, blank, reasonably blank, because don't want to overwork it. I'll touch it up with brush, I think. I think for me, most of my palette knife work is going to be finished. I think I'm just going to do a tiny bit more here in the foreground and some extra paler texture. Okay, now it's clashing with my waterfall, so maybe I need to go back into a bit of warmth. Okay, keeping it right as well. Loads of marbling effects I don't particularly like here. I want more flatter color. some ridges here. Again, just breaking it a tiny bit more down on this surface. Okay, that's starting to look slightly too similar. That's two arms. I love this color. I think it links my orangey grasses with some rocks slightly here. Just don't want it to be too mucky. Okay, that's good. Maybe a small amount of it somewhere here. Right, I think I'm done with the palette knife. All the rest, I think I'd like to finish off with the brush, or if I need to bring extra textures with a palette knife, it will be mainly textures, but not the big chunks of paint. Now, using a rigid brush might be better now, and I'll start with shaping up now some of the outlines of the darker rocks and giving it a little bit more structure back. So I'll need to top up some of my colors, especially all the dark ones. So I'm using some violet, Van Dyke, brown Van Dyke, Payne's Grey, I had a similar color but lighter version of it on my palette, so that's where I'm taking an extra hint of light from the white within that mixture. Okay, let's go for some, not maybe solid black type of color, but let's just tidy a few corners up. Let's get rid of some of the shapes which might look very similar by just shaping them up and supporting them with a brush. Maybe some smaller rocks here. Maybe it will be just some of the ridges of the strokes we've done. Maybe it will be an outline or something next to them. Right, I don't quite like that ridge. I like the texture of it here, so that's tidied up. Let's have some tone for all of this. Now you can use small strokes of the brush in a very similar as if you were using a palette knife by bridging them the paint to lie quite flatly. So that would still show a good chunk of a flat color and stay within our technique of a palette knife feel. Okay, let's break this surface down a little so it doesn't look too similar in even blocks. Okay, so I'm going for kind of darks, but not the blacks. At least not the blacks yet, or not the most dark tones yet. All right, I'm gonna do a tiny bit of a ridge here because it has a lot of paint. Hopefully good without worrying that it's going to be a solid dark line, because I don't really want a solid line. I want it to stay within, it's kind of belonging to this rock. Right, this makes it turn as well, because that shape just becomes a tiny bit more softer. Start having a bit more three-dimensional effect to it. Okay, it starts belonging to the surface now as well. That's lovely. Right, this could be broken down a tiny bit more. Don't quite like it to be all solid black. Also, because we're using quite thick paint, the same color applied with different strokes, let's say different strokes, some done with a brush, some done with a palette knife, some done one direction, other one's done in different direction. The thick surface will start reflecting and picking up that variation of surfaces, and even if it's the same color, you'll start seeing slightly different changes of that color as it shines by being in a different yeah, well, it's just different in different settings. Okay, this is good as well. Right, this is a bit too sharp, so let's soften part of that shadow. Right, I start having a lot of smudgy, dark areas on the left-hand side, so on the right-hand side of the waterfall. So I might need to bring them a tiny bit more sharper. If I put them too sharp, too black next to the white, where my white's going to be for the water, I might struggle with placing the fresh white. So I'm going to try to resist not to come too close to the water yet, because I can always touch it up. But I'm still interested into getting some of the bigger blocks of the darks developing here. Okay, so that's going to stay there. Okay, what about this area above? Again, at this type of work, it's very hard to follow exactly the demonstration, because your strokes might be slightly different, and it will make that huge change of where they're going. I'm more interested in overall tones as usual. Overall tones, the texture of certain central areas, and maybe just going with your artistic license and your flow and feel for the piece, for the painting. Okay. Okay, tiny bit more darkness in the foreground, and I think we're ready to go for the water. So now I'm gonna go for as dark tones as I want to, just to create some extra interesting shapes and patterns at the front, because that's the area we can really thrive. Okay, so that's a nice dark color, but it's because it's reflecting this area, it doesn't look as dark. So sometimes changing the direction of the strokes will do the trick. Sometimes if I position myself differently against the canvas, it actually tells me that I have done it, but from a previous angle it might have not been seen. Okay, that's a nice rock. Maybe just break some of these ones into smaller sub shapes. I keep topping up my paints with extra dark color, otherwise it smudges with all the previous ones and it's harder to see the darkness. There's some nice rough texture here. It's looking not overly detailed, but enough to have a feel for the surface. Again, I'm not using it. This, you know, when I've been probably for the last half an hour, I haven't put my brush into any tubes or oil or anything to preserve that solidity of paint, that extra texture, to more of the mixing of the colors on the surface of the painting. Also, our initial pale grayish color for the water does give us that feel of darkness, gives us a beautiful feel for the depths of the water. So all we'll have to do, just have to build up on subtones before we do the whites. Okay, tiny bit more at the bottom here. Quite like this darker rock, but some of the strokes looks very similar in widths. Some of the darkness looks a little bit similar in widths. So let's get rid of this light and see how that appears. Okay, that's good as well. Right, any other sharper edges for anything else before I go to the waterfall? Yes, I think I could do with tiny bit more work into my highlights with a brush. So I still preserved all the lovely angles and big chunks of paint, working with a palette knife and working with a brush supporting it. But now I can do with a small amount of um, sharpening of the lights. So that will be some white, ochre, and let's say a small amount of violet. Maybe a hint of blue, just to see what the color is going to start to be like. And I'm interested in how some of those highlights will be connected on the rocks. Maybe some of them just need slightly bolder light. Maybe a slight volume of them needs to be changed. Maybe some of the sharper edges of the ends need to be exaggerated or softened. Okay, I can see that's looking too strong in light, so maybe just dull it down with its brightness. Any other tops of the rocks, small volumes, just to show a little hint of light on some of them. Again, the surface of the water will be covering some of these rocks and might just give a shiny tops, even if we're not going to see a bold color for the water, the white fluffiness of it. Having a finer edge to the painting might, sorry, to the painting, to certain rocks might just give that a little bit of clarity. Okay, it needs to be attached back. So a couple of those extra lines, subdivisions. Maybe softening some of the extra textures on the tops of the rocks. Okay, maybe that will be a smaller details to add to that surface. Okay, this is a nice shadow, so I'll leave it as it is. That started being a bit too bulky, so maybe I'll come back to it. Little nuances. Anywhere else, let's just look for them. Keep topping up my brush with some fresher color. Okay, those ridges just give it a nice, just tiny bit of extra support to the beautiful palette knife marks. Make the space slightly more three-dimensional in certain areas more than others. I think that's a nice one as well. The whole tip of the rock now is coming out right at the front. Maybe just disappearing into that wet part of the structure there. I think that's going to be all of my waterfall here. I just need to be careful with how much texture of paint I have here. Right, tiny bit more at the front. I'm going to work into the water. A tiny bit more at the front. Couple of tips, couple of top edges. Maybe just even working with an existing colors. Just having some of them tiny bit more softened. Maybe I think this ridge could have a minor highlight on its top, just to show it's in front. Yeah, I think that's working for some smaller hidden rocks, maybe. The rocks we don't really want to tell too much information about. Right, I think I'm ready for a tiny bit more darkness here. That's what I wanted to sharpen up. I'm gonna go for the highlights. Right, I think just ended up with too large shape here. I'm not really okay, I don't like that swan lake. Hmm. Need small amount of light here. Which might be linking to some of this form. Okay. Right, so let's work at some of the highlights of the waterfall. Right, so I'm going to start with smaller strokes. Now, palette knife is really good to be introduced some larger whites. However, I feel a bit more tentative because everything is super wet. So I think I'm gonna go for some brush strokes at the top because I can control the amount of white I'm gonna have. build it up still with the brush, and then touch it up with a palette knife, so then some of the surface is already raised for me to work on. I'm going to use a stiff brush for the whites. So I'm just going to quickly wash it and then load it with some off-white color. So I'm going to have tiny bit of Payne's grey in it, so they will have a hint of blue on it, possibly some ultramarine as well. So it's not a fresh white. It's need to have some sort of body to it, because against all these white rocks, the white will just be jumpy. I shouldn't have any oil or runny turbs on the brush at all. It's a very stiff brush. Making sure there is no any other liquid coming in from it. And let's start from the top. I'm going to do almost like dry brushing effect. I can just drag the brush gently. Okay. To give a thinner lines are better, because I can always make them wider. Let's have some impressions of the waterfall here. Thinner lines are better. From time to time, I'm going to be topping up my brush with the fresher color. Let's do another one somewhere here. So there will be highlights on top of the rocks. There will be highlights on the edges. Sometimes I'll have to use my own lines just to feel it. The direction of the waterfall is follows across. And it's going to be somewhere here. Smaller amounts at a time, very small. Off-white, it looks bold white, but it's not fresh white. Okay, now it's going to come out. Okay, I'm going to just move a little bit more further down first. Decide how that works. Put some of the horizontal lines of where the water might have been running before putting the drops of the lines in a different other directions. Okay, so might be some heavier, stronger line here. And just top it up with a tiny bit more extra paint. Okay, where this one's gonna go across. I haven't decided what I'm going to do on the right hand side. I'm going to leave it for the moment. I want to see how the whole body of the white is going to come across here. Again, keeping up the freshness of the color, because I'm starting lifting off some mucky colors from the areas around. Maybe painting a rock, it's going around here, leaving that shape pale. Some splashes. And the water is coming this direction. Kind of staying there. I want to have an effect of a splash rather than painting it. I want to have an effect of the water is gurgling in that area because it's hard for it to pass through a narrow segment. Maybe a slightly darker tone. And then the fresher white around it. Fresher white here. Right, I'm ready for some smaller waterfalls here as well. I just break them down. Just double check my surface of the brush hasn't got any very dark colors. So I'm going to have that one is that one. That one's going to have a little bit more body to it. These ones, okay, just a bit more less paint. I'm going to come across here. Okay. And that's where all of this is going to happen as well. Just by breaking it a tiny bit more down into paler segments here. Got some dancing water. Okay, it's an impression of it rather than a full one. I'm almost finished. Just putting tiny bit more, following a higher up area. I think I'm going to leave okay, don't want these sections to be too similar either, but the water need to go down rather than around. More confident stroke for it. Okay, a bit more. Now I can dip into some of the fresher whites if I needed to build up any bolder structures, a little bit more stronger angles. Okay, and still tiny bit of decision making. I think it's going to be a tiny bit of water here. Again, clean my brush, having a finer edge. Minor little areas. Just start looking too busy. Let's just simplify it. And then put some fresher light colors. Okay. It's more of a feel for it rather than painting the exact strokes or exact copy from the photograph. I'm really happy with this, really happy with this. Absolute fine, minor little dots here and there. I think this rock could be a tiny bit paler somewhere in this area. So it looks more, it's coming towards us. Otherwise, I think I'm done. Waterfall is done. Rocks are done. This area, it just needs a tiny bit now sharpening with the darker color. And my painting is finished. Just gonna do a tiny bit of darkness. It's immediately this rock stands out now in front of me, rather than it was a bit lost. What's at the front, what's at the back. And that's just giving it extra importance, extra differentiation. Right, I'm going to stop at this. No more fiddling. Very exciting waterfall with loads and loads of nice texture. I haven't actually used any palette knife for the white parts. Maybe when it starts drying gently over the next couple of days, maybe I will touch it up. I think otherwise I am going to spoil some of the blacks. I've got some of the raised surface of the darks, I think, which could quite easily be smudged over and overworked. So this is the end painting now.